These are live links, so if you want to click on how to run a SCORE roster report, all you have to do is click on that link or that image. If you want to run an individual student record report, which would look like a report card, so to speak, that comes from like AccuPlace and so forth. Your SCORE roster report will just be a spreadsheet with all the student information and the scores. If a student has graduated, left the district, and is trying to obtain his or her results, if they tested within Dallas ISD within that 5-year period, we should be able to locate those scores within the AccuPlacer. Otherwise, the student can just go to accuplacer.org and click on the student portal and go to your AccuPlacer TSIA report and fill in the necessary information, TSDS ID, name, date of birth, country, state, and the student institution. If the student tests within Dallas College, we do not have access to that information unless the student shares his information within the district. Here are your assessment dates. For grade 12, the seniors, it's going to begin March the 30th through April the 2nd. And we'll return in a couple of weeks after that to test those students in English 3 and Algebra 2, April the 13th through the 17th. Are there any questions? Would you like to make a comment, Dr.? Go ahead.
Thanks so much, Fred. Just want to make sure that you maintain secure protocols while you're testing. Now, at this time, we're going to transition into STAR. I'm glad the middle and elementary got to hear part of what happens at the high school level. Now I can recruit some more high school testing coordinators. Yes, the band.
All right, switching gears. Now you're going to use the other side. If you haven't logged in for EOC attendance, make sure you do that. And the presentation is here. It is the EOC presentation. It is not the 3 through 8 presentation for those of you who are here for 3 through 8. Okay, so just be aware of the differences.
And so the elementary campuses and middle school campuses that are in here, as we're going through the presentation, we'll make it applicable to you as well. And if not, you can always go back and watch the video, but we will make it applicable.
All right, so again, just make sure that you clock in your attendance for today. We're going to start off with some announcements. STAR alternate 2 students. If you need to go back to your campuses and touch base with your SPED folks and make sure that every student who is supposed to participate in STAR alternate 2 is already identified. Okay, if you haven't, somebody identified April 29th at an ARD will result in irregularity. Okay, so you can't tell, you know, we can't use the excuse of, oh, well, the ARD wasn't until May, and they just didn't get to it. If we know the assessment's coming and we know the student is eligible, then that still has to be addressed by the ARD committee within the window.
And let me just say something, because we have high school in here. Y'all have been real good about addressing STAR alternate 2, but there still have been some one-offs that are asked me for support for a graduating senior. Please make sure to start with your 12th graders and make sure you've addressed all of their testing eligibility now, because this is the time to do it. After the window closes, the response is going to be they're going to have to graduate at another time. So please make sure to look at that now. And then as far as elementary, I'm already running out of grade 3 and grade 4. So if you have not had some arts for some students that are in those grades, it's going to take me time to get those additional books. So please make sure to address that before spring break so I have time to order additional materials if necessary.
Okay, Topaz alternate students, we've been running into some pretty significant, I was just looking at the numbers. We've gotten 201 corrections requests for Topaz alternate. That's a lot. That's a whole lot, okay? And what back on, hand them that ARD checklist. Make sure you're addressing all of these assessments for each of these students at each grade level, at each ARD, okay? Because the revisions are not optional. These are legally binding documents. We do have to follow what is in the paperwork. So just have the understanding. Maybe you need to get your administration involved in it. Most of the time, these revisions can be handled via a phone call. Okay? It doesn't require bringing the full ARD committee back together. But like I said, 201 corrections is a lot for a small population. That's about a third of the actual population of TELPAS all testers. Okay? TELPAS score codes and TELPAS progress. Collectively, high schools are sitting at about 86% complete participation. Some of you are way up there, above the 95%, 98, 99. Some of you are not. Okay? The time is now to make sure that you get all of those tested, those students tested. I'm thinking of 2 campuses in particular. Okay? You got to get all those kids tested as much as possible. Okay? If you're sitting in the 80s, remember we want to try to get as close to 95% as possible. Okay? I know how challenging that is at high school. Trust me, I understand. But still, our goal is 95%. The TELPAS score codes. You can start setting score codes this week, starting tomorrow. Okay? So you can go ahead and start taking care of those. A reminder about spring ACPs. Remember that graduating seniors should take teacher-made ACPs. They do not take the actual ACP that will be administered in May. Student surveys. You should have all received your student survey resources from TC support via email. The deadline to complete the date selection was yesterday, and I think everybody in here has completed that, so thank you very much. CTC access. Remember, just a reminder, please don't delete our friend Mr. Jones over here from your tag account if you see him as a CTC. He's over at DAP and takes care of our DAP testers for us. And then also Ramsey Benavides and Dion Hilliard. You might see them listed as CTCs if you've got students participating in the Phoenix program on campus. Please do not delete those folks as well. And just a reminder, but don't contact TEA, please and thank you. And remind your campus staff to do the same. Do not call TEA. Remember, your staff should contact you as the first line. You should contact us. We will deal with TEA on your behalf. All right, so moving into our agenda for today, we're going to quickly cover resources, and then we'll segue into this EOC overview. We'll probably have a condensed test security version since we just did the TSI, and then we'll do before, during, and after testing. Your resources and reminders up here are linked is your test administrator manual. You should have received those on campus already. The slide also has some from December probably too. If you need more, contact your GWTC. If you haven't received them, contact your GWTC. For those of you who have paper administrations, I think there's maybe only one high school that has a paper administration this go round. The directions, the instructions for administering that paper assessment are included on this slide, as well as the accommodations educator guide and the EOC one-pager, the STAR one-pager. It's the same for elementary, middle, and high schools, one-pager. Your DWTC will host virtual small groups as necessary, and of course we will have the Zoom open for the entirety of the testing window. Additionally, there's some other planning resources available to you. You can edit all of these and share them out. This first one is a DISD testing. It's like a kind of a parent presentation, like if you were going to do that, that's what that will, it's a short slide deck. And then the spring administration parent letters in English and Spanish are linked there, as well as the school messenger messages for this administration. Just as a reminder, you might want to talk to your bio folks. The Assess Science curriculum, remember we've been talking about this for about a year or so, but this is the semester where it's actually implemented and goes into effect. If your science folks can look at the STAR Science Resource webpage that's linked there, but remember starting with this semester, spring 26, grades 5 only the new sheets. Just a reminder about the data collection new to Texas. Remember that students who participate in STAAR, who are enrolled in Texas schools for the first time this year, in the current school year, must be identified as being new to Texas. So you should work with your registrar to make sure that all of those students are correctly identified. If you want to look and see who already is identified as that on your campus, you just do entry code equals EOS in the search bar of Howard School, and that will give you your whole list. New to Texas means that a student had to start the year outside of school in Texas. Okay, so they may have ended the year in Dallas last year, but over the summer they moved to Louisiana and they started Louisiana. Then they come back. Okay, well that student technically is new to Texas. The classification will apply to them for the entirety of the school year, and they can have this classification multiple times over their educational career. It's not a one-time thing. It just depends on where they start at the beginning of the year. Okay. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Felicia.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go through the overview, which is going to include your critical dates and deadlines, as well as student eligibility. And so you all know that STAAR is a bunch of overlapping windows in the spring. Your primary week, so for example, for English 1 and 2, your primary week starts April the 7th through the 10th. And then the next week, you will be starting the primary week for biology and U.S. history as you're closing out RLA. Then as you're closing out biology and U.S. history, you will be starting the primary weeks for algebra. So one thing to note about that, even though you see that long window once, you need to make sure that you make note of when each window ends, because when the window ends, you cannot go back and enter score codes for that particular subject. So after the 17th is when our RLA window, our English 1 and 2 window will end. I cannot go back and try to enter score codes for English 1 and 2, nor do makeup testing for English 1 and 2. Everybody got that? Perfect. There's a couple of key dates. So again, you want to try to do the bulk of your testing during your primary week and keep the second week for your makeups. Ideally, you would do primary testing week 1, makeups Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and that gives you Thursday to set score codes. We ask that you do that this way to give yourself some time, and you all know how things tend to happen, technology issues. If you wait till week 2, students who were there week 1 are now out, or you can't find them in the building. So you want to make sure that you're trying to do that. Touch.
We got lost again.
What did you do? What did I lose? A couple of key dates I want you to keep in mind. By Thursday, April 16th, you should have all your makeups completed for RLA and set the score codes. By Thursday, April the 23rd, you want to have your makeups and score code complete for biology and U.S. history. And then by Wednesday, April the 30th, you should have your makeups and score codes complete for algebra. One thing to note, if you do set score codes and your principal brings you someone like a senior, they're, after you set the score codes and they want you to test them, you can test the kid, just go back in and set the score code from what you have set it to, probably absent to the S for score. All right? Ideally, it would auto change, but it doesn't. If you have, for the campus that has paper testers, make sure you complete those week 1, because remember, you do need to allow time to enter that information into the response entry platform and to return the paper test material to the service center by the Monday of the 2nd week of that window. So again, week 1 is going to be your primary testing. It's going to be your paper testers, if applicable. The paper testers' answers should be submitted into the response entry. You're going to make sure that on the days that you start testing that you run your participation reports. You can run your completion report if you just want to see a percentage. You can run the test status code or the plan and manage report if you want to see students who have not tested that are registered to test. And then you want to start creating your makeup rosters. And then, of course, week 2, you'll be doing your makeups, running your reports again, and closing out testing by setting score codes. Make sure you export and retain a list of students that you set score codes for, as well as your final participation numbers. Critical dates, if you have a student that needed an accommodation request form submitted, that is a student who needs a TEA approved accommodation. That deadline was March the 2nd. Of course, right now, this week, we're doing our test coordinator training. By March the 26th, you want to submit your spring testing plan to administration for review and feedback. If you can submit it earlier, we do recommend that you do that. And there is a sample linked on the one-pager, as well as a couple of exemplars from an elementary, middle, and high school. On March 30th, the district will upload new students, including their attributes, their accommodations, and removal of withdrawn students. So mark that day when we come back from spring break. I know we're starting to get spring STAAR requests, but just hold off until March 30th. High school, Rachel's like, not from high school, we're still just, okay, on March 30th. And we will get those new students and their attributes uploaded. April 1st, you want to, by April 1st, create your sessions and print test tickets in time. You do need to submit correction requests for students who do not have a ticket. So on the Friday prior to each window starting, make sure you're running a new and enrolled, enrolled and withdrawn report for students, so that you can catch any students that you need to add for the upcoming assessment window. And then the last day to complete your campus training for TEA is going to be Friday, April 2nd. That's the Friday prior to the first window opening. April the 21st, you will upload your English 1 and 2 seating charts to the Google Classroom. By April 27th, you upload your biology and U.S. history seating charts. And then by May 5th, you would upload your algebra seating charts. You all tend to ask this. I know your counselors are asking, so mark this date. May 27th, early student results will be available for STAAR-EOC. June 5th, the preliminary assessment reports for accountability will be delivered, and that is also the time that we are able to do EOC data corrections. So if for some reason you set a score code that should not have been set or that's incorrect, then that is the time that we can do that during the data correction window. Some scheduling considerations. We've already talked about the importance of first week of testing. You want to make sure, we recommend the first week of testing. I know sometimes you guys plan for the first week and then someone above you changes that. You want to stress to them the reason why is you need time to get your students tested, especially with large populations, so that you can make sure that you have an opportunity to do makeups and set score codes. Campus principals should reach out to Leslie Stevens if they need additional support or clarity. As far as scheduling, we are going to ask all campus to complete the Qualtrics survey indicating when your selected dates for the upcoming STAR 3 through 8 and STAAR-EOC administration. A response is going to be requested by Thursday, March 26th. We only need your primary dates. You do not have to include your makeup dates. And that survey is linked on the slide. A couple of considerations. House Bill 1883 does require districts to provide an alternative testing date for a student who's absent from school on the scheduled testing date to observe a religious holy day. And then if a student is in an activity or something like UIL that prevents them from testing during that primary week, make sure that you catch them the second week during your makeups. And then just as we mentioned, as Lauren mentioned, managing multiple assessments, remember that when STAR is beginning, STAR off is ending. So I know some of you have large populations for STAR off and your teachers they're testing up until the end. Just know that that's going to put you returning test material right in the middle of a STAR day. So we'll send that out where you can start signing up. If you can urge your teachers to finish a little bit earlier, there are a couple of days prior to STAR testing that will be available for you to return that material to the service center. And so when we talk about juggling, yes.
How soon will the Qualtrics survey be active?
Is it not open?
No, ma'am.
The Qualtrics survey where they indicate their schedule, can we get that link open when you get a moment, Keisha?
Thank you.
Thank you. As far as juggling multiple assessments, just know that this is going to be a busy month as we just talked about. You've got STAR Out going on, you've got STAR going. We'll be dropping for elementary campuses the iReady module. For secondary campuses, you'll be getting that ACP module, in addition to everything else that's going on. So it's a lot. Make sure you're checking the block calendar for those tasks to kind of break up some of the items that you have going on, and so that you know what different assessments are coming up and how to manage those tasks and split it among the different assessments. Some best practices. So testing plans we already talked about, that you want to have it ready at least by March 26th. Your testing plan, if you can submit it earlier, I know some of you already have it ready. Make sure you go ahead and submit. If I were you, I would request a feedback date from my administration. That way, if they want you to, I know, remove this proctor or don't use these rooms. Y'all know that that one thing can shift everything else in your plan. So the earlier you can give it to them, the better. Make sure as a best practice that your testing plan includes your classrooms that you plan to use, your test administrators, your student testing roster. Give them numbers of students. If you need small groups, let them know about that. Anything that you can think of, if your lunch schedules need to be adjusted, put that in your testing plan. And then by March 31st, you want to verify accommodations in TIE. Remember for TIE, there's that nice clean test attribute report that gives you a PDF of all the students registered to test, and then it tells you, it includes every subject, it includes their accommodations for every subject. So you want to run that report, and then a best practice would be to share that appropriately out with your SPED, your 504, your LPAC. If for my elementary campuses that are in here, it is going to include your presentation, so you should be able to look in advance and know what language the student is set to test in. High schools, Woodrow, you guys, your students with ASL videos, make sure that if they're using ASL videos, it is listed on that attribute report, because those have to be turned on before those students test, log into the test. If it's not turned on when before they log in, you won't be able to turn it on after. So you're looking for those type of things and running that report. You can share it out. Again, remember we're going to do that upload March 30th. So you can share it out starting the 31st and ask your deciding committees to look over it, make sure all of their accommodations are correct. That way, if you need to do manual changes, it gives you some time. And then your campus training per TEA, that deadline is Friday, April the 2nd. If you already know what day you want to train your campus, I would go ahead and put it on my principal's calendar so that you can get approval for that day. A best practice would be to share your test rosters with test administrators and counselors at least 1 to 2 weeks in advance so that they can try to help you clear up any discrepancies. And then also to compare your campus roster with the test tickets to make sure all your students are accounted for. And then for paper testing, you want to make sure you're testing week 1 to allow time to enter into the response entry platform. And remember that everything would need to be returned in the original packing box to the service center by Monday of the 2nd week. So if a student is taking multiple tests, you can't wait until they're done with all the tests because you need to return it. Like, we'll be shipping things out each week, so or each assessment window, so you need to make sure that you're returning it by Monday of the 2nd week. And then setting score codes, make sure that you note the closing dates where score codes have to be set by each administration window. And this way, any student who's registered to test, you have to account for. And then again, make sure that prior to the start of the testing window, you are running those enrolled and withdrawn reports so that you can submit your correction request, because once the window starts, you are accountable for those students. As far as the eligibility for STAAR-EOC assessments, we see our 5 assessments on the slide, and then we know that in order for students to be eligible to test for EOC assessments, they should take the STAAR-EOC assessment as they're completing the course regardless of the enrolled grade level. However, they cannot take and are not eligible to take the assessment if they've only completed 1/2 of the semester. So if a kid comes in this semester and the counselors put them in U.S. history, but they don't have any type of evidence of the first semester of U.S. history, or that they've taken that first semester, they're not eligible to test. So just make sure, this is why your campus rosters are the most important tool you can have. And then considerations, keep in mind students taking Reconnect. If they do not show up on your, you may want to talk to your counselors now. So here's a best practice. Talk to your counselors now about students taking Reconnect so that you can start knowing who these students are, because they often are not flagged, right? And you have to submit corrections for them. And then we have to confirm that they're in the Reconnect courses. So go ahead and start having those conversations, as well as students with blank transcripts. If you all have been updating your campus rosters as you've been running across blank transcripts, we've always urged you to keep a list or a Google Doc and share that with the counselors so that they know, hey, these kiddos, it doesn't matter if it's a senior, if it's blank, we're not going to test them. So they need to know who these kids are so that they can start looking and updating those transcripts. And then your P-Tech students who are taking both semester 1 and semester 2 in one semester, it needs to show somewhere that they are taking both. Ideally, we can log into, when you submit corrections, we can log into those in PowerSchool and look at their schedule, and we can see where they're taking semester 1 and semester 2, and that way we can flag them. But those are the conversations you want to start having as it pertains to high school eligibility. And then a couple of things that you want to use, there's resources that we've talked about throughout the year. When you are determining a student's test status, make sure that you are referring to the main guiding document, which is the student's AAR, because it's the official record of what they have and have not taken. You can also check students in the state portal. So a lot of times your counselors will send you information that says, hey, this isn't showing on the AAR. This test score needs to be added. Remember, you send those to Fred Washington and CC your district-wide coordinator, and that's how we get that information added. So if you run across students who have scores in the state portal, that is how we get that added to PowerSchool. And then you have your STAAR-EOC their roster, which talks about, it tells you your STAAR-out students and who is eligible to test based on the classes that they're enrolled. And you have your EOC status report. Your EOC status report is a reference. It is not your guiding light. It should not be your roster. It is not your roster because it only indicates, it only gives the status for things that are shown in on the AAR. So you have to do your own work as far as creating your campus roster and using this as your reference. As far as spring testing, we will have a lot of first-time testers. So these, of course, are students who have never tested. This is their first time taking the test for that particular assessment. And if a student chooses not to test for a retester, for a first-time tester, it is an S with a score for refusal to test. Now, for your retesters, then if they are taking a retest and they choose not to use one of these opportunities, it is an O. For if the student is a retester and chose not to participate in administration, I think is what the appeal says. And then your out-of-school students, if you do have former students or out-of-district students that would like to test, you're going to have them contact Lauren, and we will arrange to have them tested at the Buckner building. There is a link on the slide, so if your counselors reach out to you, you can go to this particular slide and give them the link, or you can just click on it now and send it to them. And then you have your STAAR-Out students. Remember, STAAR-Out students will also be testing in the spring during their STAAR-Out window. You just heard Lauren talk about the importance of making sure that all STAAR-Out students are addressed prior to when the STAAR-Out window closes. Remember, these students, you don't consider them retesters or anything like that. They are taking the test as they're enrolled in a class. And so they also have to meet the eligibility for STAAR-Out 2 in order to take the test. If you have a student who did not take the test when they were enrolled in the class, you need to reach out to your district-wide testing coordinator for guidance in dealing with that student. It's going to be really important during this administration that on your roster you know which students are first-time testers versus retesters. The reason why is because when it comes time to set score codes, you cannot blanketly assign a score code to all students. The student, remember we said you got a lot of freshmen testing during this. This is their first time taking their algebra, biology, and English 1. You wouldn't blanketly assign for those students that didn't test that, oh, student is a retester and chose not to test, because that's an irregularity. You've got to use the appropriate score code. So make sure that on your rosters you are noting who's a first-time tester and who's a retester. And then eligibility waiver status. So sometimes when you are looking at your roster, you may have that a student failed the assessment and needs to test, but then you pull the AAR and it may say meets or waived. So what you would need to do, remember there are a couple of waivers that a student could get. Code 3, but Code 3 for out of state, or at, they receive credit out of state or at a private. Usually that is indicated on the AAR with a Code 3. Then you have your E1 exemption. So student is enrolled in U.S. schools for 3 school years or less, or qualifies as an unschooled asylum refugee. And then the provision applies to an EB enrolled in an English 1 course or English for ESOL course if the EB student is enrolled in U.S. schools for 3 years or less, or qualifies as an unschooled asylum refugee, and the student has not yet attained a Pass Advanced High Reading rating. And so for students who meet this eligibility, you will get a list of students that it'll have the English 1 provision, or when you refer to the EOC status report, you may see some students for English 1 that it indicates E1 exempt. And then your ARD-wave students, this is for SPED students in grade 12, where the ARD committee has identified that they have tested at least once and that passing is not required, and so it may say ARD-waived, or on the AAR, I think it would say waived or meets. And then you have your IGC waivers, students who are classified in grade 11 or 12 who've taken and have failed to achieve the EOC assessment performance requirements for graduation for not more than 2 courses are eligible for IGC review. And then your past subs, so students who tested at least once and they want to use a substitute assessment for that grade. Just remember when you're considering substitute assessments, no? Are you talking to me? Oh, remember when you are considering substitute assessments, they have to have tested at least once, meaning a score code was captured for them prior to the assessment for them to use the sub-assessment. So if the AAR just shows the meets or the waived and you want to know or need to know what type of waiver was applied, you can go into Power School and go into the EOC status, and it specifically tells you which waiver was applied and when. So that's going to be important. When you log into TIE and you want to look at your 12th grade SPED students who are still registered for testing, you can send that, export that list and send it to SPED and ask, are any of these students are waived? You can do that at the beginning of the window so that you can go ahead and submit your correction for us to remove the flagging. We talked about the English 1 exemptions, and so the dual language department is going to provide an updated list by tomorrow. So that means that we'll have a testing status report that will be updated tomorrow. And so some of the students, you may want to double check on your campus roster because some students who may not have been E1 exempt may now be listed as E1 exempt. And remember, students who receive an E1 exemption may choose to participate in the English 1 spring administration if they like. Otherwise, if a student is not going to participate, you would submit a correction request to have eligibility turned off. And if they do want to not use that English 1 provision and test, you can request to have us turn it on. So for exemptions, unschooled asylum refugee, the process would be if you have a student and the campus determines this kid is an unschooled asylum refugee, so they submit the I-94 paperwork to the dual language department. The dual language department then reviews it, determines yes, the student meets eligibility to be classified as an unschooled asylum refugee, and so they can receive an exemption. In that case, you do not test them, you do not set score codes for them. Dr. Govan gets a list of those students and she lets you know these students are unschooled asylum refugee, please don't test them. She goes in and sets score codes for them. All right? And she's gonna do that during the first week of testing. If you have a first-time tester who is a refusal to test, just keep in mind there's no such thing as opting out, and so it is considered a refusal to test. A parent, Texas Education Code 26.010 does say that a parent can remove a student temporarily from a class or activity for the purpose of religious or moral beliefs, but it does not allow them to remove the student for the purpose of avoiding a test. So what would you do? So of course the district is required to provide testing opportunities to all eligible students that are in attendance during the administration of the test. And then unless the student is eligible for basic transcribing, the student is expected to record their own responses in the response entry platform or on the paper version of the test. If the student refuses to test for grades 3 through 8, you submit the score code appeal with an S with the refusal reason. And then for your EOC assessments, if they're a first-time tester, it is also submitted as an S with a refusal to test.
All right, let's handle test security for EOC very efficiently, right? And if I happen to go too quickly for someone, or you have any questions or concerns, let me know, and I'm very accessible. Right, so the first slide just reminds you of what are secure materials. All I'm going to say about this is make sure your folks are clear about what secure materials are, right? Make sure you get those session IDs off of the whiteboards or wherever they're posted at the conclusion of testing. Okay, campus training. We know that everybody who participates in any way, shape, or form must be trained. You need to do that for this exam by April 2nd, and then you submit the acknowledgement that has been previously mentioned. And I know we'll mention that in the TC Weekly and other venues as a reminder. Now, the oath, we know that this is that confusing oath. I think we're all pretty familiar with it right now. If you're unfamiliar, the graphic is very helpful for you to ensure that you know who initials where, right? And of course, you keep that with your retention documents. So this is the QR code for that acknowledgement once your staff is trained by April 2nd. And then the seating charts we've already talked about. And the only thing I'm going to add there is that we will collect these for this test administration. I will push out an email to you with details. We'll also include it in the TC Weekly with a link of where to submit and any other pertinent information. All right, electronic device log, I think we've covered that sufficiently. Electronics use by adults. Remember, regardless of what the personnel assignment is, I mean all the way up to the principal, no use of cell phones in testing rooms with the exception of a true emergency. Typically that involves the welfare of the students or the adults, right? What is permissible is the use of desktops and laptops for testing purposes, right? So it's not grading papers and doing lesson plans and all of that, but for testing purposes. Here's what we need from you with your campus communication plan. We need it to be explicit. And ideally, it's like subtitled in your testing plan. Here's the communication plan for testing at Woodrow Wilson High School, right? And then you spell it out for your folks to know and for that documentation. Of course, you want to make sure you're compliant with what's in the test security manual and the guidelines for electronic device usage that y'all are familiar with. Now, in regard to personal communication devices with students and exceptions, if a student has a documented need in their special program paperwork, of course we're going to honor that as a district. You just need to make sure you're aware of how to implement that, right? So if they need their cell phone during testing to monitor their diabetes, that's addressed in the DCCR. And you want to make sure that you implement it appropriately. If you have any questions about how to do so, you can't find the information, whatever the case may be, you reach out to us and we'll help you out with that. That, by extension, applies to prescription lenses on smart glasses. So for state testing, as it stands now, they're allowed to use the smart glasses. But it really heightens our responsibility to think about, okay, what can we do preventative to keep those from being used inappropriately, right? Just a few things I'll throw out at you. Talk to the parents and ask them to have the conversation with the young person about how those prescription glasses are going to be used during testing, right? And then it seems really appropriate, not to advertise it to the student or anything, but to create some preferential seating. Oh, it's cool for you to wear those glasses, but we don't say it necessarily, but you're sitting right in front of me, right? I'm going to be able to really active monitor your use of testing and those your testing and use of those glasses, so on and so forth. Some generations of smart technology require communication with the cell phone. So in addition to collecting the cell phone, particularly for that individual, we're making sure it's powered off, right? And that will disable the problematic uses of those technologies. And then in regard to wearable jewelry, there's little, if any, of it that's medically essential, right? If it's unless it's medically essential, they can't have it. They can't have it anywhere in their proximity. We collect it, right? If they claim it's medically essential, contact us if you have questions. Spike and cheating, we've talked about it. We're all aware of what we need to do on that. And right here, Test Security Manual, page 14, right? We talked about it sufficiently before, I believe. And then if a student refuses to sign the honor statement, if there is one for their test, that's okay. They still need to follow it, right? So they can still test, and we're going to hold them to the honor statement, all right? So sign it or not, you're still going to have to test according to what it says. All right, and then switching teachers, we know, I think we have almost all secondary folks in here. Can't test in your subject area, exception special education teachers, and then if you're elementary, if you're one or two elementary folks we might have in here, make sure you're clear on what the switching teachers school board policy is, right? This isn't just a rule, this is school board policy. We've got to make sure 100% compliant on that one, in which we try to do on everything, of course. This is just that reminder, yeah, we all have the duty to report, and we have, as the leaders of our campus, the duty to make sure our personnel understand their duty to report, right? Everybody in DISD has a duty to report if they know that a testing irregularity has occurred. And you know what? We expect procedural irregularities. We're not looking to place blame and figure out, was it Misty's fault or was it Sarah's fault? We just need the transparency. We need the documentation. We need to resolve it and get it behind us, diffuse the matter, right? So please, be forthcoming when irregularities occur, and we just move right on past it. And as I said before, please make sure to follow the checklist so we get good TISVs. I'm going to address this on another slide. Let's go here and just say this. Please, whether we're talking about TSIA2 or this exam or any other secure exam in DISD, nothing on the desk that's not a testing item, right? So no hoodies in case they get cold. That shouldn't be on the desk, right? And in fact, their personal belongings shouldn't be in their proximity at all, especially the electronic ones. But please, keep the desks clear of anywhere that a cheat sheet or an electronic device can be hidden. You get it. Of course, we got to have the 30-to-1 proctor ratio for this particular exam. We got to make sure our folks understand that they're not to look at test content, not to talk in the teacher's lounge about which questions might have been hard, or, oh, I heard there was this question. Those are really problematic behaviors. And then we know on the day of testing, teachers don't go into a room where their test is being given, where their content area is being tested, right? And so we want to make sure they understand. That goes for before the test, say like 12:01 a.m. on, right? All the way till the test concludes. And of course, this is just the obligatory, all those bad things that can happen if we don't conduct testing in a way where we have serious irregularities, right? And then two last slides, central office district monitoring. So many of you know, most of you know, that central office members donate, roughly 250 of them donate 2 school days to come out and see how you test, right? And some of them, they have a deep knowledge of assessment, and many of them don't. And we ask them just to look for the general things, the basic things. There's a basic survey. And I'm telling you, and you can believe me or not, but believe me, the feedback tends to be very positive. It's a chance for you to shine, right? So shining starts with getting back to the person when they contact you in a couple of weeks, right? So in about a week after we get back from spring break, they're going to choose their school. They're going to call you so that they can find out, what are your primary testing days? What time do you begin handing out materials? What time do you expect the students to start testing? All of the relevant information. And every year I've done this, I've had monitors that say to me, I've called the campus like 4 times, nobody returns my calls. Don't be that campus, right? That's not a good start to this process. And then in that same vein, so to speak, orientation materials, like when they get to your campus, that's a chance to showcase all the work that you've done to plan a great testing day. You're already creating the documents, right? So assemble them for them. Hand them a folder or a binder or a packet that has the proctor list, the rooms that you're using, all those things that really show them all the work that goes into good testing, orients them, makes it easier for them to be on campus that day and give good information back. Last 2 things on this. The monitors from central office are trained not to go in the testing room. it doesn't happen very often, but should they forget and it's problematic for you, you can mention it to them just nicely, and I'm sure they'll be like, oh yeah, that's right. Or you can let me know and I'll very diplomatically remind them, right? And testing room doors, they're to remain open during testing, unless there's a reason to close them. And there's not a lot of reasons, but here's one. If the testing room is right across from the bathroom and you can hear everything that goes on in the bathroom, close that testing room door. If it's a behavioral room and you've got a problematic student in there, go ahead and close that testing door, right? Okay, last thing, and this one's really, really important. Everybody pay attention. Really pay attention. A lot of you know what this is about, but you don't necessarily recognize what's going on here. This is a new component of Cambium. It's called Hotline Direct. This is an interface for the campus to access what we call response alerts. When TEA flags potentially problematic student responses, written or oral, right? So remember in the past, some of you have received emails from me and says, hey, your student said this, and you should follow up with them and make sure that they're not in danger or something like that, right? So now they've got a much better system for that. And so there are really 3 stages that these alerts can be in. New, right when we receive them. And then acknowledged when you say as a campus, we're upholding our responsibility to take care of our students, right? And you should have somebody that is their responsibility and in a redundancy to make sure that no student is in danger and we don't act in a timely fashion. That could be very bad because we all care about our young people and we don't want liability. And you know we have a professional responsibility in this regard, like when it comes to CPS matters and such like that, right? And sometimes you'll look at them and it'll seem kind of silly. It'll be like this one word, die. No context. One word, kill. Or some music lyrics that you're like, everybody knows that song. That kid was just bored and he's typing music. In that case, I just have a conversation with the student. If I'm campus administrator, is this the best way to spend your time when you're testing? You know, like that kind of thing, right? All the way to the other end of the spectrum is, I want to kill myself. I've read that several times this year. This year. My dad tried to kill me, and I'm afraid for my little brother. I've read something like that this year. And those are CPS reports. And it's y'all's responsibility as a campus, why I'm being so emphatic about it. Because we're managing 233 campuses. I know y'all got a lot to do, but here, you're not going to get that many of these. Some of you have already received an email explaining how this works this year. And others haven't, because you're only going to receive it this semester if we receive one for your campus. And then I'm going to reach out to the campus coordinator, the testing coordinator, and the principal, and make you aware that we received one for your campus. Here's what you need to do. I've granted the 2 of you access. And look, if I'm at Skyline High School or Sunset High School or Molina High School or any number of other high schools, I'm going to request that my counselors get access to this, right? All you got to do is reach out back to me. The email says that. And then I'm going to have a really crystal clear discussion on my campus, like best kind of documented ultimately in email, about whose responsibility it is and what is the redundancy. And that, guys, as a campus administration team, we recognize that this is going to be a priority when we get one of these, and we're going to act on it. Now, there are several people in here that know that they've been sitting on one of these for 13 or 14 days. You got to move those from this category to the other. The only reason it's been sitting there for 13 or 14 days is because I know it's an innocuous one. But I can't do this for every campus the whole time. Once I have notified you of that, it is a campus responsibility to act on this, right? So please, hear me. And those campuses that have them sitting right here in red, let's get them moved on and acknowledge that you've received the thing, right? And everybody accept this responsibility moving forward. Enough said, right? Enough said. You hear me? Because this is important. We don't want our kids endangered when we can do something about it, and we don't want liability in this business. All right, I appreciate y'all. If you have any questions about test security, we'll answer them at the end.
All right, we're gonna go through a couple of before testing tasks, and then we'll take a quick break. So one of the things that you want to do, you all know most of your prep is gonna be before testing. One of the things you wanna do is make sure you're creating a plan. So on this image actually links to a sample plan for you, so you can use that as the template. A couple of things to note about your campus plan is that you wanna begin testing within 1 hour of the school day. Campuses have to consider and include a consolidation plan in your campus test plan. Students should take about 3 to 4 hours to complete the exam, and then any student who needs additional time can continue testing. Students who are still testing after about the 4 hours should be moved to a consolidation room. And then students who need additional time can continue testing to the end of the regular scheduled school day, but no testing should go beyond 7 hours. Campuses should not plan on testing students beyond the school day again, but it can't go beyond 7 hours. And the average completion time for students testing last year is linked on the slide, and I can tell you that it was about 3.5 to 4 hours for the English 1 and 2 RLA assessments. Things you want to consider in your plan are logistics, changes to test day and test day prep. So based on your campus rosters, think about how many students are testing, where you're going to test them, how many rooms you're going to need. Are you going to put them in an isolated area so that other students aren't on the testing floor disrupting? Which proctors are you going to use? Will you have a tech room? So do students know where to report if there is a tech issue? What day are you going to do your training? Have you talked to your principal to put that on the schedule? And then when is your makeup testing going to occur? You also want to think, are you responsible for creating a plan for the non-testers? And if so, how does that look? Are there going to be changes to lunch? Like, are you going to have your testers all go to a lunch? Are you going to do SAC lunches? Have you started talking to the cafeteria manager yet about your spring testing and spring testing days? And then what are your attendance procedures? Remember that you do want students for high school, when they come in, they should sign the rosters to show that they were actually there. Is there a plan in the event of an emergency? And then what is your plan if you have to relocate students? And then as far as test day prep, have you looked at their accommodations? Have you reviewed the accommodations to make sure they're correct and tied? Have you done device checks to make sure that the language on the computer isn't set to Spanish? When are you going to check for extra devices? Do you have a cart prepared for extra devices in case a student's device goes dead or doesn't work? Do you have extra chargers? Those are the type of things you want to consider in your plan. You also want to think about who can serve as a test administrator. So certified teachers, that includes administrators, counselors, librarians, APs. They can all serve as a test proctor. Alternative certified teachers can serve as test proctors. And then supervised non-certified staff such as your paraprofessionals, they can serve as test proctors, but make sure you use that form that is on the website in one pager that says paraprofessionals designated as test administrators. And then as far as your campus interventionists and demo teachers, they can serve as proctors, but based on EK regulation, not in the areas they support. So if for some reason they support all areas, you cannot use them to serve as a test administrator. And then Title I employee duties must remain aligned with the intent of the federal program. Student teachers and non-hired staff cannot serve as test administrators as they are not DISD employees. Other things that you want to consider in your plan are your processes. So what is the process for late students? If the student has to be read the script verbatim, who's going to do that if you all have already started testing? Are they going to report to a room where someone reads them the script and then escorts them to their testing room? How is that going to look like? What is there a cutoff time? What is the latest time a student can arrive for you to test them, or to consider putting them on a makeup? And then what about students who get sick? Remember, students who get sick can continue testing if they're sent home, their test would be paused, and then when they come back, they just log into that day's session, and then they're able to continue testing. Their responses, their previous responses are locked after 8 hours. But how is that going to look, or what is going to be the process for your proctors to notify you that a student went home sick? One thing to note, if a parent picks up a child, that is not considered going home sick. So make sure your parents know in advance your test dates, so that if they do have appointments, they can kind of either try to reschedule those appointments or move them towards the end of the day. Because if they pick up the child, they cannot come back to test. It's only if they're sent home, if they get sick and they're sent home. And then what are your makeup opportunities going to look like? How are you going to get that makeup list out to your teachers so that they know which students still need to do a makeup? What days are you going to do makeup? These are some of the processes that you want to consider in your planning. The more you can add to your plan, the better it is and the more clear for your campus. There's a couple of tasks that you all are well versed in. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. You guys know that you need to create unproctored test sessions. You also want to make sure that you verify all students who are registered to test are actually enrolled in TIE. And then you can do that comparison when you're printing your test tickets, or you can just run your TIE roster and compare it with your campus roster. You also want to verify that online attributes and presentation like language for elementary or ASL videos, that it is listed correctly in TIE, and that it is, if not, it's updated prior to testing. So a couple of allowable tasks, CTCs, they can do the things in yellow. You can print test tickets, update accommodations, update presentation, run your participation reports. You can set score codes. What you cannot do is add or remove a student or change a student's eligibility. That would be like their above grade level, STAAR-EOC eligibility, flagging them for the STAAR or anything like that. You are not allowed to do that. You would work with your district-wide coordinator so that we can get that stuff done for you. And then as far as student registration and TIE, again, have some type of system in place so you can compare your roster of students who should test versus the students who are registered in TIE. This allows you to submit correction requests in advance. One thing for you all to note is 1, 2, 3, 4 of us, and all of y'all are testing in the spring. Every grade level, every subject, same window. If you wait and you send corrections and I need this done now, it won't happen. I'm telling you, it won't happen. It won't. Give us some time, because we're trying to power through them as quickly as we can. But sometimes after your 25, there's 55 sitting in front of you. So we're doing our best, but make sure this way, when you begin testing, you've already done the work in advance, and we have enough time to get them added for you. So find some type of system, and make sure when you're running your registration rosters in TIE that you're looking at spring EOC and not December. Campuses should not drop students for non-attendance during the testing window. So students enrolled during week 1 of the assessment window who are absent and don't test, you will need to submit a score code appeal for them. And then you all know how to submit correction requests, because they're coming in daily. And so just continue doing that. Don't request a student that is at DAP to be removed, because those are still your students, and so we will deny that request. All right? Let's take a 5-minute break.
Want me to do it?
Want me to do it? I know, because my gosh, I was stressed out. It's like high stress.
So we don't have a response from them on how they would get together. So we were just hoping we could DNR it and then other student contest. So hopefully I can know once we run.
I want this school.
All right.
Why I said you can take me on every time. And I'm not, she said, in my feet. You already know what she's doing. One of my kids and I realized you just all this stuff had left them.
What the heck?
Right before I don't know her right in the So he was out of the good room. All of them were first. Very deep. He was going to come back. But now he's there.
How's it going for you? Yeah, doing good. Good.
So we don't know. Maybe we can or maybe last. Either last.
The circle loading question. How you doing? This doesn't, right? Yeah.
So she just
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. What am I doing? Losing my mind. Technically, and I know y'all so it's, yeah, so technically in my, a lot of times I'll just leave my bag in the truck, and it was my favorite thing to watch, right? So of course I thought I left it at the door, but also when you in a house somewhere, you come here, if you have none of your stuff, I give myself a break.
You don't even need to go. Yeah.
with us. I told her this is the day. They just be like, they were whenever principal like what's the plan?
Okay, test coordinators, we are ready to move on to the second half of your STAAR-EOC training once again. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Here on this slide, of course, you are familiar with the online tools that are available to all of your students. We just encourage campuses to make sure students are familiar with these tools prior to testing by utilizing them on the practice site. Your students are well versed on these tools, I'm sure. All right, accessibility features. Remember, these are features that are available to any student. They do not have to be documented. Although the students may utilize them during instruction, remember they cannot be required to use them on the STAAR assessment. Here is a table of the accessibility features that you can find in the DCCR. This table is very useful because it provides a category, description, and then most importantly, examples of those accessibility features that students use and examples that are not allowed for accessibility features. We get lots of questions about scratch paper, how much can they have, what can it look like. That information and examples can be found in that table, as well as information about bilingual dictionaries and small group settings. Here are the committees that have the authority to approve supports for your students. We just want to ensure that MTSS, 504, ART, and LPAC committees are documenting the supports in the appropriate locations within our district systems. Here, the designated supports. Remember, these are supports that students must meet the eligibility criteria according to the policy document in order to utilize these supports. The students should be routinely and effectively using them, but then also remember that you have to refer to the policy document because there are other requirements that many of them require of the students before they can receive them for testing. TEA approved supports, your complex transcribing, math scribe, extra day, and other. Remember, these must be submitted to TEA for approval before the student can utilize them. If you feel that you have students that meet the eligibility criteria according to their policy documents, then please reach out to your district-wide testing coordinator so that we can provide you with the Google link so that you can provide information, and we will submit that TEA approval on your behalf. ARS, the accommodation request form for TEA approved supports, the deadline, soft deadline was March the 2nd. However, if you find that you still have students that may meet that eligibility and you want to submit the ARF, you may still do so. It's just that at this point, it kind of limits the time that TEA has to provide an approval prior to testing day. If your requests are approved, then they are good and will expire on the last academic day of the school year, but for high school, definitely they expire June 30th after summer testing. Remember, TEA approved accommodations cannot be used until they are approved. In the appropriate paperwork, it must indicate that this designated support is pending approval from TEA. If you are completing the Google link to submit a request for these supports, please make sure that in the rationales you do not provide any confidential information about the student. During unexpected emergencies or when a student breaks an arm or loses their glasses, there are supports that you, the CTC, can make a decision on to provide for the student. And so the first thing you want to do is consider accessibility features and make those available to the student. Remember, those supports do not have to be documented. If the accessibility features do not provide enough support for the student, then you, the CTC, can make a decision on the locally approved designated supports. Usually, those supports have to be approved by the appropriate committee, but in an event of an emergency, you do not have to have documentation for that, and you, the CTC, can make a decision on those supports. If step 1 and step 2 does not meet the need of the student, then move on to step 3, contact your district-wide testing coordinator, and we will work with you to see if we need to submit a ARF for a TEA-approved support. Here are your options for oral and sign administration for students who are deaf or hard of hearing. Small group sign administrations can be provided via a test administrator. If you're one of those campuses that has a student that's deaf or hard of hearing, be sure to contact your district-wide testing coordinator for those proctor codes. And then permissive mode, again, is another way of an individual receiving signed administration. Just ensure that the proper technical equipment is available before testing. Here you have your ASL videos, which are offered as an online option for signed administration for your students who are hard of hearing or deaf. Please make sure, CTCs, that the ASL videos are turned on prior to testing, and you can check this in the student's profile when you run the settings and tools report in time. Here we're talking about supplemental aids, content versus testing strategy. If you have a supplemental aid that is being used as a content reminder, then that would be allowed. They use the example PEMDAS. The students should be able to independently identify that the expression involves multiple operations. They understand the order of operations. They can recall what the letters in PEMDAS represent. And then they can apply that information, the order of operations, to completing their math problem. However, if you have a supplemental aid that is being used as a testing strategy and it actually tells students how to respond to a test question, then that is not allowed. The example raises for RLA, it provides a step-by-step process for constructing a written response. And so that would not be allowed. The takeaway at the bottom, a supplemental aid should be like an unmarked roadmap. It is only useful if you already know your route. A strategy is like using GPS. It gives you turn-by-turn directions to the destination. So that's a good little way to differentiate between content and supplemental aids that are being used as a testing strategy. Supplemental aids. So here are some guiding questions that you should ask yourself when you are approving your supplemental aids for your teachers on campus. You should have a system to where you're collecting the supplemental aids that teachers would like for their eligible students to use. Set deadlines for you to receive those supplemental aids so that you have time to go through and compare them to the TEA PowerPoint to ensure that they what's being provided is allowed to the students. A couple of reminders when it comes to embedded supports, supports that are provided by the testing platform, like text-to-speech. Students who are eligible to receive this support, remember, it must be turned on in the testing platform. Again, students must meet the eligibility criteria for text-to-speech, and it's provided by the platform. Again, test administrators may not read any secure content from the screen. However, for paper administrations, the test administrator should be provided oral support training. Oral administration support training. For non-embedded supports, like your supplemental aids, please refer to TEA's PowerPoint, which is linked on the slide. Remember, supplemental aids, students must meet the eligibility criteria according to the policy document. They cannot just be distributed and provided to all students. If you approve supplemental aids, please make sure that you have them labeled with the student's name, placed in the test administrator's binder or folder or whatever you use to distribute materials. And then just a note that teachers and test administrators may not provide supplemental aids to students that were not distributed by the campus testing coordinator. Of course, 2 weeks prior to testing, you want to go into TIE and verify accommodations. You can do this by running your all student settings and tools report. Remember, this report will actually provide for you in the far right column all of the supports that are active and turned on in the testing platform. Share this report with your stakeholders on campus. Ensure that the supports are correct. If you find that you need to make some changes, and those changes have been made in EdPlan and in My Data Portal, then you may manually make those changes in TIE in the student's testing profile. However, Felicia mentioned earlier, March 30th is our date where the district will be uploading new students and including updating attributes. So after the 30th, if you find that there are changes that need to be made, you can manually make them at that time. This slide is just showing you that the embedded supports like text-to-speech should be turned on. If you need to make those changes, you can locate the student's profile in the testing platform, turn the toggle to on, and then make sure that you click save. Your non-embedded supports like supplemental aids or individual structured reminders, they too must be documented in TIE. In the student's profile, if you scroll all the way down, you will find the non-embedded support section, and you will check the box next to the subject that the non-embedded support would be used for. Again, make sure your students are prepared and they have opportunity to work through the practice test and become familiar with the online tools. Remember, students have two options when it comes to the practice test. You can create a practice session where the student can log in using their first name and TSIA ID number and use the supports that are already turned on in TIE, or they can just simply log in as a guest and just become familiar with the online tools or turn on the supports if they know what they are that they receive on testing day. Here are some videos that we are sharing with you that our digital coordinator, Keisha Pearson, created. We ask that you share these videos with your teachers and with your parents so that they too can become familiar with the testing platform. Make sure that you provide a date and time, opportunity, or class period to do device checks to ensure that the students' devices are not set to translate any content. We have already kind of encountered this issue during TELPAS, so it's going to be important that you complete the device checks. What is that? We need to change that. As a reminder, remember Cambium, they have recently developed an updated testing browser that has impacted how students access the secure test. And so linked on the slide are those instructions that you can follow to ensure that the correct testing browser is selected during testing. Now we just had a 10-minute break, so I guess we don't need a 30-second break. So we'll move on to during testing.
The next two slides contain information about paper tests, and so it sounds like there's one school or one high school in the district that has paper tests. So if you submitted a paper test request, you should already know if that request was approved or denied. So if a campus has a student that's approved for a paper test, make sure that the test administrators understand how to distribute and collect those paper materials. Make sure that your test administrators know how to provide required accommodations, how to maintain test security and actively monitor. Make sure that they do not duplicate or capture test content unless approved. Make sure that the student is not interrupted during testing, that seating charts are completed with all required information, and that the test administrator is reading any special instructions included with the paper test materials. For students with paper tests, they will not receive an answer document. They should be tested during the primary week of the content area window. And then when they complete their assessment, the responses should be entered by either the campus test coordinator or a trained staff member no later than the day after the testing for the student has occurred. The responses do need to be entered before the test window closes for that particular content area. TEA will not grant extensions or reopen tests. Also, you will need to maintain documentation of who transferred those student responses into the response entry, and then return the test booklets to the service center in the original boxes before the conclusion of the second week of testing. It will be an irregularity if the campus fails to enter those student responses, and then the campus will need to contact the parent because the student will not have any test scores. This contains test materials that you will need to distribute to your test administrators. Make sure you provide them with a manual as well as seating charts. You will need to determine what template you will utilize to distribute the test session ID numbers. And those test session ID numbers are secure. So when you distribute them at the end of the day, make sure that you get them back every day at the end of the day. They are secure, considered secure test materials. You'll also need to provide your test administrators with the student test tickets. On another slide in this section is a link to the student login steps. You'll need to provide your test administrators with that as well. Provide them with pencils, scratch paper, graph paper for Algebra 1. You can also print out the reference materials. And so the link on this slide will take you to the STAAR resources page that has the links to reference materials for the different content areas. And TEA does say to print them directly from that resources page, not to just print one and make copies, to make sure that the information is not distorted. You'll also need to provide calculators for biology and graphic calculators for Algebra 1. If your campus decides that your students will use handheld calculators, and then dictionaries and thesauruses for reading, reading language arts English 1 and English 2. If your campus decides you're going to distribute physical dictionaries. You'll also need to provide the supplemental aids for students with that approved accommodation, as well as headsets for students with a text-to-speech or speech-to-text accommodation. For student attendance, again, make sure that you document student participation in testing. You will need to have an attendance roster. Test administrators are required to collect physical signatures from each student at the time of arrival. Signatures must be completed in ink and verified before testing begins. Make sure that completed rosters are retained according to district record keeping guidelines. And this provides a clear verification of student attendance. We have had students in the past swear up and down that they were there for testing, but there's no evidence that they were there. So we just want to make sure that we have a system in place that if a student, says they're there and they're not, then we have some documentation to back us up. Also, administrators should count test tickets against the roster to make sure that there is a ticket for each student in that testing room. For scratch paper, all students that are taking the STAAR math assessments must be provided blank scratch paper. So that's for math, grades 3 through 8, as well as Algebra 1, and the same for Spanish math, grades 3 through 5. They must be provided with blank scratch paper. And for the other content areas, students can be provided blank scratch paper at request. At a minimum, you can provide a scratch paper for all students for the other content areas as well. And so scratch paper is any blank medium that can be erased or destroyed. If you go to the DCCR, which is the District and Campus Coordinator Resources, there's some examples of what scratch paper can be on that website. And so, for example, students can use, lined note cards. They can use dry erase boards. They can write on their computer monitors. You can provide them with colored scratch paper. So anything that's blank and can be erased or destroyed. Now, what cannot be used as scratch paper is anything that's been manipulated. So if it has pre-numbered boxes, graphic organizers on it, if the graph paper has the axes already labeled, if the teacher has folded it into fours or done anything to it, then it's not considered scratch paper. This is a dictionary policy. So for reading language arts as well as English 1 and English 2, students must be provided with, students must have access to a dictionary, let me say it that way. So students can use bilingual, ESL, sign language, picture, standard monolingual dictionaries in English or the language most appropriate for the student. And you can also provide dictionary thesaurus combinations. What's not allowable is specialty dictionaries such as teacher-made, student-made, subject-specific, or slang dictionaries. And so students can use the embedded online dictionary that's in the testing platform, or they can use a physical one. So you as a campus can determine if you're going to actually pass out dictionaries or if the student will use the embedded dictionary. If they use the embedded dictionary, it's not an irregularity if they don't have the physical one. For the embedded dictionary, it does read aloud, so make sure that your test administrators are trained to make sure that the students have their volumes turned off on their devices so that the system is not reading aloud and disturbing other students, unless the student has the text-to-speech accommodation, and in that case, they should be using headphones. For the bilingual dictionary policy, for the other content areas, so for math, science, and social studies, your EB students can use a bilingual dictionary, but it has to be the word-to-word translations only. So for the other content areas, math, science, and social studies, it's not that every student can use a dictionary, just the EB students can use a bilingual dictionary. And so what's not allowable is bilingual dictionaries with definitions, pictures, and or examples. Also, what's not allowable is for students to have access to a bilingual dictionary app on a tablet. This is the calculator policy. So for the Algebra 1 STAAR-EOC, students must have a graphing calculator to utilize throughout the exam. For biology, students must have a basic calculator, for example, a 4-function calculator. Scientific or graphing calculators are allowed for biology but not required. And so different types of calculators they can have is a handheld graphing calculator, a graphing calculator application, or they can utilize the online calculator tool in the test platform. And so again, with the calculators, if they use the online calculator, it's not an irregularity. So your campus can determine if they're going to use the online calculator or if you're going to provide them with handheld calculators. If they do use handheld calculators, the calculator memory must be cleared after each student uses it. This is information about the test administrator script, so the test administration directions. Be sure that you provide your test administrators with a manual or a copy of the script prior to testing so that they can read it, practice it, and become familiar with it. And the test administrator script starts on page 35 of the manual. And so these are some of the highlights that we just wanted to point out. So if a student takes a break during the test session, the student should pause their assessment, and then when they come back from the break, they can log back in using their login information. For a student that's receiving accommodations, the test administrator is permitted to modify the directions when needed. For EB students who request assistance, the test administrator can paraphrase, translate, repeat, or read aloud the directions, and also the directions that introduce particular test sections or question types, as long as the substance of the directions are not changed. And for students using text-to-speech, make sure that test administrators are aware that there may be some parts of the test with the do not read icon next to passages or test questions. And so that indicates that that part of the test will not be read aloud to the student. And so you might have students that think that their text-to-speech is not working. However, that's a part of the test that is not actually read aloud for the students. And so the same thing with students using text-to-speech and content language supports. Some of those parts may not be allowed to them, and they'll see the do not read icon. And so make sure that your test administrators are aware of that. This contains a link to the login steps for how students log into the platform to start testing. And so we suggest that you provide a copy of this to your test administrators. And so just remember that students do not go through Clever to access the STAAR test. They do go through the secure lockdown browser. During TELPAS, we did have some issues with the updates for the lockdown browser, and so some students were getting the BBP error, and then there were 2 options for the test browser that were available to students, so if they clicked on the wrong option, their test would not work. Please make sure that your students practice, because if they go to the practice test, they'll be going through the secure lockdown browser, and you can determine if those devices need to be updated before testing actually begins. And these are some common login errors. So just make sure that your test administrators are aware to make sure that the student is entering their correct name from the test ticket. And so sometimes you might have a student where their first and middle name are in the first name column and tied. And so, you know, they're just typing their first name, but their middle name is actually there as well. So just make sure that the students are entering the correct information from the test ticket and that they're utilizing the correct session ID number. Also, when you're creating your sessions, make sure that you're creating the unproctored sessions. So you're clicking on the green tab, not the yellow or the pink tab, because the yellow and the pink tab is not gonna work. shows the student sign-in experience. So students will be provided with the student test ticket as well as a session ID number. They'll go to the lockdown browser, they'll see their sign-in screen, and then they'll see a screen that says, is this you? If the student gets to the screen that says, is this you, and their birthday is wrong, they can still test. Okay, just contact your DWTC so we can work through making sure that their birthday is corrected. But they'll look at that information, and then they'll follow the prompts to start testing. For the student test day, students must be allowed to test at their own pace. So make sure your test administrators are not telling them to, go faster, slow down. They're not making sure they're on a certain question by a certain time. Students must be allowed to test at their own pace. If you have students who are still testing after 4 hours, they should be consolidated into another testing area to continue testing. And TEA does mandate that you have a consolidation plan. The purpose of that is so that students who are finished testing can go to another place and they can continue with instruction. So most students are expected to complete the STAAR test in about 3 hours. However, they do have up to 7 hours to test, but they must finish the test within the same day. So they have up to 7 hours, but they have to be completed within the same day. And the only exception would be students who have an extra day accommodation. These types of breaks are included within students' 7-hour testing time. So if they're taking water breaks, bathroom breaks, snack breaks, short physical or mental breaks, that will be included in their 7-hour testing time. What's not included is lunch. So if they break for lunch, they will still get 7 hours outside of the lunch break. If they have medical breaks or if there is an emergency situation, that will not count against their 7-hour time. Also, if you're consolidating students, that will not count against their 7-hour testing time as well. For short breaks, such as restroom breaks, bathroom breaks, water breaks, snack breaks, make sure that the students select pause. Okay, so they're just going to pause their test, and then when they return from the break, they'll log back in. For longer breaks, such as lunch, the student will actually log out. Okay, so for the shorter breaks, they can click pause. For the longer breaks, like lunch, they would actually log out, and then when they come back from lunch, then they'll log back in using their login information. If you have a student that gets sick and they have to leave for the day, make sure that they do not submit and end their test. Instead, they will just log out, and then they'll continue testing when they return. When a test is paused by a student, if they log back in within 8 hours, they can access the questions that they previously answered. If they pause for longer than 8 hours, then they will not be able to go back and revisit questions that they've already answered. Any student that is idle for more than 20 minutes, their test will be paused. Also, if you have a student who does not submit correctly, their test will go into pause status. So there are some instances where a student's test may go into pause status on its own. Cambium has made updates to the student login interface. So if the student is going to the operational site where the test is actually located, the actual STAAR test, their screen will show blue. If they toggled onto the practice test site, their screen will show green. Okay, so make sure your test administrators know to make sure the students are not going to the green site, the green page to log in, because that means that they're going to the practice test. Also, Cambium has made some updates to the text-to-speech settings. So students can increase or decrease the volume for text-to-speech. Those with the approved accommodation. They can change the pitch of the voice. They can make the voice go faster or slower. And then for the text-to-speech tracking, I believe it's a highlighter that tracks the words as it's reading. They can turn that option on and off. Students can also modify their color settings, their background colors. They can make their mouse larger or smaller. They can change the color of their mouse, etc., etc. For the strike-through tool, Cambium changed it so that the strike-through doesn't cover up the words. Now it's little slashes. So if students use the strike-through tool, they can actually still see the words. For the test submissions, test administrators should make sure that students are actually submitting their test and clicking end test when they have fully completed the test. If they do not properly submit their test, the test is going to show as paused on your completion rates, and so it will actually count against your completion rates because the student didn't actually submit their test. And so make sure that you're printing your reports every day around 2 or 3 o'clock to make sure that all of your students actually submitted once they completed their test. And once submitted, students cannot return to or change their answers. When you're running your reports in TIE, looking at your completion reports, also your test status code report, you'll see students who have actively started testing, their test will either say started or paused. So if you have a test that says started 0 out of 0, and you know the student started at 9 o'clock, but now it's 1 o'clock and it's still saying started 0 out of 0, that just means that the system is still counting the questions, okay? Because the system goes through a quality control process. So if it's saying, you know, started 0 out of 0, don't panic. That might mean that the computer is just lagging behind. Also, again, if you have students in the pause status, that might mean that they're taking a break. That might mean that they've been idle for more than 20 minutes, or that might mean that they did not submit their test correctly. And so during TELPAS, we did have some students who were actually trying to submit their test, but it didn't. The computer didn't submit the test. So if you run into those types of issues where the student is actually trying to submit their test and it's not working, just contact your DWTC and we can work with you. We might need to call Camden for those types of situations. And then if you see completed, submitted, or reported, that means the student is in good shape. They did submit their test. And so again, it goes through a quality control process. So first it'll say completed, then it'll say submitted, then it'll say reported. If you look at your test status code report, and this might not happen with EOCs. I don't think it'll happen with EOCs as much with elementary or middle school. But if you have a student who has 2 rows on the test status code report and they only should have taken 1 test, that might mean that they opened the wrong test. So for example, for elementary school, if a student is supposed to test in English, but they open the Spanish test, then you might see a test that says reported and one that says pause 0 out of 47. So that might mean that the student opened the wrong test. So in that situation, contact your DWTC because we'll have to DNR, which means do not report. So basically remove one of those tests. The same thing for middle school, with the 7th graders taking the 7th grade test. Well, they're taking the 8th grade test now. So they might accidentally open the 7th grade test, even though they're supposed to be taking the 8th grade test. And in that case, we would have to DNR that test.
Okay, now we'll discuss what you're going to do after testing to close out. So of course, each day you're collecting back materials that were issued out to your test administrators that morning at the beginning of your test sessions, but you're also, of course, collecting it each afternoon. You do want to do one final sweep though at the end of the test window and make sure that you have all the materials back. So all of your test tickets have been accounted for, used and unused. Like students who need to take a makeup, that those have been separated for the makeup to be provided. You want to ensure that you have all of your session IDs, and then any scratch paper, reference materials, or supplemental aids that were written on, we know that those have to go directly to the shred box, so you want to be sure that you've collected those back. And then other materials such as dictionaries, if you have to shuffle those around for different assessments. And then, of course, headphones or headsets, if you pass those out, you want to be sure to get those back to have them for future administrations. If you're a high school or maybe a middle school and you're not going to use all your personnel, so maybe you use them for RLA, but you don't plan to use them for math or vice versa, if you're going to be shifting your test administrator manuals back and forth between staff members, be sure that you get those back because it is the same manual for all 3 administrations. The most important thing that you're going to do is to set your score codes. So we know that any student who is registered to test but does not take the test within the window, we must set a score code for those students. Remember, score codes have to be submitted and processed before the close of the window. So that means that you want to start setting those at least 24 hours before the end of the window to ensure that you have time to go back and verify that all of your submitted score codes are now processed. None were rejected or anything like that. And then finally, remember, if a student does end up testing after you set the score code, that's okay. You're just going to go back and set an S score code to override the previously set one.
Ideally, it would do that, but we find that it doesn't always, so we want you to go back and set that S score code. The score codes that you'll use are your S score codes. So remember, the S applies to any tests that are submitted by the student. Okay, those tests, you don't have to do anything to them because they automatically submit for scoring. If you have a student who's in pause status, it will automatically submit for scoring at the end of the window. So you're not going back in and doing anything to those tests in pause status. You're just leaving them. They will submit at the end of the state window. If you have a first-time tester who is a refusal to test, remember we don't have opt-ins, so your students who are not there to test, that's considered a refusal, right? Or if you have the parents filled out the documentation to say that they're not going to take the test, that's a refusal. For those first-time testers, you do have to set a score code of S, okay? Your absent score code. This score code is used for students who are absent throughout the entire window. You need to ensure that you have the documentation within PowerSchool to support the use of the A score code. If a student is absent on your scheduled test day, but you're going to test them during a makeup day, do not set an A score code. Just allow them to test during the makeup day. Also, be sure that you're not setting an A score code when the O score code may be most appropriate. Let's talk about some times that the O score code may be used. Sometimes we have students who become ill, especially if you wait towards the end of the window. We have students who become ill and they don't return within the window to complete the assessment. Sometimes if they didn't make a lot of progress through the test before they left, you may say that's not really an accurate representation of the student's abilities. As a campus, we don't want to have that test scored. That would be an example of an O. Contact your DWTC for guidance though, so that we can help you in determining what score code to use. Also, we know that O score codes are used when there's an irregularity, such as the student was caught in a cheating incident. You're going to submit the TISV form, and in the response that you get, the resolution will let you know if you need to ensure that the O score code is submitted. Okay. For our high schools, students who choose not to participate in a retest opportunity, those students are O's. That's why for the high schools, you have to know who your retesters are versus your first-time testers. Because if they are a retester in the spring and they choose not to participate, that's an O. Okay. Students who have a court order and they're excused from testing, those would be an O when they're in that HSAP. So that's not as common. The biggest thing to remember about setting score codes, you see down at the bottom, is that you should not be submitting requests to remove students. You should not be dropping students for attendance during the windows. If a student is enrolled during week 1, they don't test, and you're setting score codes in week 2, you're going to have to address them via score code appeal. We're not removing them, and that's important because we want to ensure we're not flagged for audit for dropping all the students who you guys decide, well, or your campus decides to take out. All right, so when it comes to setting score codes, remember we provide you with the document of score code reasons. So on the left-hand side, this is what it looks like if you haven't been into TIDE or you're new. When you're creating a score code appeal, you're going to go into the create request, and it's going to pop up with the additional comments box. That's where the score code reason goes. So you can see on this example, you're going to copy the reason directly from the list that we provide you. You paste the entire comment within the box. So A equals, S equals, O equals. You're copying that entire comment and pasting it there. Please do not try to think of your own reasons. Every year we have people that just start typing. Don't do that. Copy and paste, please. And that's for us to be able to help you, that we ask for you to put the whole thing. Most importantly, failing to set a score code or setting an incorrect score code, it's an irregularity, but it's also going to impact your campus's accountability. Okay, so you need to be sure that when it's time to set score codes, you know exactly which score code needs to be set and that you're taking care to enter the right score code. Because I know it gets rushed at the end, but you want to take time to ensure that this is correct. You'll also have to do some reconciliation, right? You want to ensure that the correct number of score codes have been submitted. So you're looking at the number of students who were registered to test, and you're comparing that to the total students who tested. You can use the plan and manage report inside, and you can find the students who haven't tested. At high schools, that's a large number of students sometimes, so you may not want to look at that list. But you can run your test status code report and filter for your blanks. This is how you know who needs a score code to be set. But just make sure you compare it to the numbers and that everyone has been accounted for. Then we have the medical exclusion policy. In order to help keep students who've experienced significant medical events from impacting the campus's participation, there's the medical exclusion policy. For a district or campus to be able to apply that though, the student has to have been marked absent throughout the entire window and you weren't able to assess them. These are considered on a case-by-case basis, so you can reach out to your DWTC. We'll work with you, but the process is basically that the A score code has to be set. You let us know, we send you the Google form, you provide the requested information. If it is appropriate, then we go into TIDE and we submit it on behalf of the campus. And then at the campus, you're collecting and maintaining the documentation. All right, so that is going to conclude the after testing task. We're going to move into some reminders to make sure that we highlight some important things. So of course, the device check, you want to make sure that your devices are prepared, that you've gone through the steps that have been in the wait, which was linked in the TC Weekly, and that you have working devices ahead of test day. You also want to ensure that your accommodations within TIDE, and for if we have any elementaries here, that your language is correct. How are you going to do that? You're going to use your test attributes report that you get from TIDE. You're going to compare that to My Data Portal and what has been captured and make sure that everything is aligned. If there are questions or concerns, you want to address those before test day. Then finally, you want to make sure that you have a copy of the login steps and troubleshooting for your teachers, and also copies of the manuals because they do need those to read the script. So just make sure that all of your bins or baskets or bags or whatever you use, that it's prepared. Remember, during testing, you should not have general announcements during testing. Those should be done ideally after testing or before testing begins. You also need to limit volunteers because remember, only district employees can be in our secure testing areas. Also, we always have campuses who experience power outages or they lose connectivity. It's important that you have a plan in place and communicate that to your staff because those test administrators become really nervous on test day when something isn't working. So they need to know what the plan is. Also, they're going to be sure to collect the test tickets and they're going to monitor the students to ensure they're not discussing the test content. Okay, and then you can let them know how you will follow up with them with what your next steps would be. Reach out to us though, and we'll be happy to give you guidance. Dan spoke earlier of the learner in danger notifications, so please just be sure that you have a plan and people who are going to be responsible for addressing those. And you need to have a way or system for reaching out to students who are absent during testing. This could be something like a Google Sheet or Google Doc where maybe front office staff, your counselor, your registrar, people are reaching out to the student to find out why they're absent and try to get them there for testing. So just make note of your attempts. And then finally, we want to ensure that you have accurate attendance records. So whatever your procedure is for taking attendance, make sure that you have that documentation in place. And then finally, after testing, your DWTCs will go through a virtual quality control with you just to make sure that everything has been addressed. You'll have to upload your seating charts, so pay attention to Dan's information. Those dates are on the block calendar. If you have more testing coming up, especially for our high schools, you can use your test administrator manuals for the summer. So be sure that you get those back and hold on to them because you won't get more for the summer.
And then finally, of course, you're required to maintain certain documentation after testing. We've linked the retention document list, so be sure that you take a look at that. We get investigations from time to time, audits. You need to have a system for filing all the documentation that if somebody calls and requests something from you, you're able to easily go and pull that within a reasonable amount of time. Shouldn't take days or hours for you to go and find those documents. Everything should be organized. So please just make sure you take a look at that. All right, Mr. Jones over there, if you don't know him, he's the wonderful TC for DAEP. If you have questions, you can reach out to him. He trains the staff. They test your students if they're here. If they test, then of course they're good to go. If they don't, he sets the score codes. But if you have a question about a student who's at DAP, you can reach out to him. For homebound students, it works a little bit differently. For the homebound student, the TC for homebound is going to need for you to provide the test ticket and the session ID. Those teachers are trained by her. They go out and they test the students, but they need the test ticket and the session ID from you to be able to do that. The students don't test, they set the score code. And elementary, middle, if you have a student in Phoenix, those TCs, they train their teachers, they test the students, and they set a score code. So if you see that you have a student who says they're in the Phoenix program on their schedule, you don't need to do anything for them. I work with the TCs to address those students. Finally, here's a look at that list of documentation that must be retained. You can see we've highlighted the STAR items for you, so just be sure to file all of that away at the campus. We have the score report dates again, so be sure that you mark these on the campus calendar. The scores go to the CRS first, then they go to the family portal and the research portal. You must notify parents of how they can access their students' scores. We've linked it here for you. They can go through PowerSchool, use the single sign-on, and view the scores that way. But you guys have to provide them with the information on how to do that. You know who we are. Feel free to reach out. Dr. Govan will take it over for any questions.
I just have a few reminders. You can't do testing by yourself. You need to have a team. This is a critical time. Please treat testing as you would a lesson plan. Have a backup, train someone else in the event you get sick or there's an emergency. For the devices, you can't check those by yourself. So you're going to have a day where your whole campus does a device check. During TELPAS, you saw that there were a number of ED students who needed their devices updated. We're dealing with a larger load of students, so it would behoove you to just go ahead and have a device check day. Reminder about blank AARs, we're not testing them. No matter who calls, we're not testing them because we don't know if they're exempt from something, if they're eligible, if they've completed the course. We're not testing them. And I'll say it however nicely I can. No. Cheating. Just now, I just got an email because there were two kids that cheated one in December, one last spring. One at Lincoln, one at Skyline. They waited until after the window to report the irregularity. As a result, their information was not invalidated, and so it's still showing that they passed the test. So now I'm having to do extra work to go and correct the mistake. I know you all are busy. I know you're trying to prepare for the next round of testing, but if you have a student that cheats, it's imperative that you report it to us at least by that Wednesday of the testing window. Dan and I are working tirelessly. He's working a little bit more than me, but I'm still working with him to make sure we help you all address all irregularities before the close of the window. So please make sure to be intentional about that. The other reason why you want to do it, because if you don't properly address the score codes, that's when the RDA kicks in. Almost all the high schools got that RDA email about justifying why students were not present or accounted for during testing. We did a great job because you only had to address like 4 or 5 kids, and so that's way different than what it's been in the past. And that's mainly because we're monitoring the score codes as you're entering them in. But I need for you all to be intentional. Please do not overwhelm the district-wide testing coordinators with corrections with removing kids that you knew that weren't there in January. I mean, that's something that you need to probably talk with your campus administration about now, so that when we're in the window, you're not panicking trying to get the district-wide testing coordinators to do it. They're only one of 4, and they're supporting 60 schools, and so they're up working at midnight. I'm seeing the emails fly in midnight, Saturday, Sunday, so let's be mindful of them and appreciate them as well. And then the last thing I wanted to make sure to talk to you all about was manuals. A lot of the irregularities that happen are at the high school level. So the cheating, make sure to address that. But another thing we've noticed is when we have to go out and do serious investigations at the middle school and high school level, they'll say, oh, I didn't read the manual. I just followed the PowerPoint that was presented by the testing coordinator. Please emphasize that it's their responsibility to read the manual. If something happens and they're held responsible, it's not your license on the line, it's their license. And so please emphasize that. At this time, I'll take any questions. Okay, no questions. You all have a great afternoon and a great testing Like he's still showing for who does. And we can slow down so we can think this through. For that traffic.
I was like, I just kind of read that. That's just okay. And how yeah, it's only anything that was like a what should I do about those? Like, we're in the boot camp, took the test, I didn't pass. I never passed anything.
I never got it.
They're not gonna show. It's not gonna be a it's not gonna kids that are gonna be. I'm but yes, when she told me that, I was like, hey, Lauren. Yeah. Did you look at it? Can you look at it one more time? I just did. Like again, I was like, I can tell you right now, my students are gonna be like, absolutely. I just did. And I was like, and it's like that too. That's very fast turnaround for me because for the kids that you have. Right. Now I have to figure out and do the schedule of that. What they're doing. So that's what so you. This is a big, I know it's just one day, and I was like, it's like, but I was like, she said, no, this is very comfortable, and one day is a day on the calendar for you, but this is a ton of work for me. And tasks, and I have to do it in the middle of everything else I've done. So, here. Clarify. Yeah, and the other kind of those are like that has that. Okay, so I was gonna.
Yeah. Exhaustion.
Only ones that, because we got them. Why do you think we're gonna do three?
So.
Why did you fly on the same day as the what if it was it orchestrated? That knows one act and one act, but also.
Well,
So. What if?
I did. Yes.
They actually give you specific. I have. That. Actually. So.
But one of them, yeah, I have me, because I was gonna do, I had some, because I had several girls on it, like, well, 13 hours. Both of them are trained, I was, they know what they need that will learn. They had a college campus that had a standard, so there, and that's how they have. That's why you have vouchers.
Yeah.
But that's on Saturday.
I wonder if it's just.
Well,
They started entering this twice in some kind of way, I don't know how. Yeah. So I just need to ask, make sure, you know. No, but this isn't how, I see this in the district.
Is this? I would say.
What's this? Yeah. Okay. I guess so. Guys, thing is, like, normally they'll put like the SSD number in there. Yeah. But she knows every time it does something.
I just get well, I learned the word text around is key. I just don't switch to that. I started it and I said something around it. She did and 1:30 and Friday night.
And then they. Yeah, at that point, you're just like, honey, I think you know, like,
I'm sure. See how you can work. Like alphabet.
No, we went through that all right now. We are on my knees, like, I'm tired.
I can't say anything more. So last one. Were you 43? 31, okay, because I got this vague recollection of a picture of 43, but I could be totally wrong. I shot so many games and I could be through that.
Yeah.
Could be Karen Sproul. At some point when I get a chance, I'm gonna check, yeah, a lot of my stuff I don't have anymore, like solid or moved on. I was so good. You know, this is stuff, but, and I'm a huge sports player, so I'm trying all kinds of stuff. Silver names guys, you know, here. And he autographed my photo. Oh, yeah. Oh, that's cool. It's cool that we were on the field at the same time. I know that, but I took the picture now. But it's a small world. It's good. All right, man. All right, take care.
Oh, no, I don't know, but that's a problem, that, you know. Yeah, it's just, it's fun and all that, but then it's kind of.
He and I were on the same field at the same time.
She became my favorite, but. Yeah.
Like adding certificate, you sure.
Research the models.
I understand it, and so I reached out to them and I'll let you know. I don't know, when I went back and looked at her history, like in Power School, she's flagged as ED. Fine. Well, here's the good thing about it, is because they're self-pass off, it's just gonna be holistically rated. So you don't, the teachers don't get see like how do they get this. Yes, they will. And but so here's what made me wonder about Chelsea is when I came to her and said, hey, I'm like one day. You're not ministry, but ever anything. Like somewhere in her IEP or anything. But because yeah, I don't know. I think it might have been done in error. So I reached out to the LCAT vice manager to see if she could help me figure it out. Because well, she had been YU, but she never took off anything. I don't know. Like why she would have never taken self-assault that was accurate. Oh, I'm sorry. We're just gonna have to wait till the next one. Because I don't know her. But I wanted to show you the self-assault material so that I can train my teacher. Yeah. They're all right here, so we go to TC weeklies. And here's the one pager.
Yeah, starting like that.
Yeah, everything's in here. Well, not this one, no, not, it'll be in there tomorrow. But yeah, so here's the campus training, so use that, and then the observable behaviors, you should have received those. You got your self-test manuals, but if not, you can always just print additional copies.
Yeah.
But that's what they'll need to fill out. So, oh, what I was gonna say, now, once you get those back from, and they're filled out, you're gonna have to go into Tide into the response entry. Or do you remember that part? Okay, so you'll sign into Tide. Okay, well, you'll use the Waffler grid in the top left to change over. Last year it was called DEI, this year it's called RE. So you'll just find the RE system, click over, put in the first name is CSDSID, and you just enter the responses. We'll have 4 different pages, one for each of these. Yeah, you do that. Exactly. So, yeah. It only if you had a paper. So that's all. Yeah, oh yes, start on self-assault, yes, yeah. But if you run into any trouble, let me know, just try to find out what's going on with her. Yeah, Marisol usually responds pretty quickly, so. Yeah, he knows how to take it. Got a creative business tree.
So over 25 years. $20,000.
More than pounds.
Yeah, he's a son of a yeah.
And look like this thing through. I don't know if it's small versus one. So you have it's for those kids.
Okay, so just another question, if I can make them up for you. Yeah. So yeah, right here, put that Waffler grid, and then just put on RE. And then once you put in their name, this is like. No, that's for you, you're gonna put in the responses on the observable behaviors. You have any score codes? Like students who should have tested well right, that's right. You get to doing that, probably not so much, but that's right here in some create requests. So it's good. Just make sure you copy and paste. Yeah, just refresh your memory, but if you need help, let me know. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything you need. Hey, that's. You sure do.
And we can take select water bottle too, a good water bottle. Plan, put on the decoration, that means somebody got taken down. But then they make you feel happy like that?
No. Scrooge.
Oh.
Well, they were very pretty.
Yeah, or you know, here, well, the longer something. Yeah. Yeah, you can acknowledge the type. And it's a good water bottle, isn't it? Well, it's like this to you. No, water bottle. You don't have your.
Yeah, let's sit on the floor, so they decide that.
No, okay, I'm fine.
Gosh, let's do the nursery.
Oh, say this. No, really.
They is full. Yeah. Oh, my gosh.